Mr. Ferguson, what is the idea of this tour of the milk zone?
Well, to provide the producers' representative, Mr. Murray, and myself an opportunity of reporting to the industry what might be described as current affairs.
And you mentioned to me earlier that there could be a crisis developing in the industry.
Yes, I would say, without any semblance of ambiguity, that we're on the verge of an impending crisis.
And what is this crisis?
Well, this is due to the bewilderment and confusion, and I might say apprehension, caused as a result of excluding A, the Milk Board, B, the Milk Zone Dairymen's Union, as members of an advisory council appointed for the purpose of examining dairy industry affairs with particular reference to liquid milk marketing.
And what line will this report take, or this inquiry take?
Well, the line is intended to examine mainly the report of the previous Minister for Agriculture, Mr. Chaffee, wherein it's recommended that a single authority be brought into being to control dairy industry affairs within New South Wales.
Will this have any effect on the milk zone dairymen?
In my belief, it can't avoid but having effect on the milk zone dairymen. It's claimed that it will have no effect. Well, if that is so, then obviously there's no justification for any form of inquiry or attention to this matter. It's not a question of whether it will have an effect. It may well have an effect, and therefore the milk zone dairyman is, as I said, somewhat bewildered and certainly very, very apprehensive.
Mr. Ferguson, what do you think about the federal government scheme to rehabilitate the dairy industry?
Well, personally, I support very strongly the scheme, which I believe to be a part answer to the problem of low-income farms, especially in Queensland and the northern part of New South Wales, where, to our own knowledge, the main problem is due to A, small farms, 2, low income, 3, lack of efficient marketing facilities. The federal government scheme is in accordance with the recommendation of an earlier dairy industry inquiry and what is described as the McCarthy report, tabled in Parliament in 1961, and the government's current intention is just one of the recommendations, and I myself believe to be a worthy recommendation. It's designed to rehabilitate low-income farmers within the areas described.
And would you say that, or would you consider that the Hunter dairy farmers, would they come into this category?
I don't think so.
They're operating quite profitably.
Well, I wouldn't say quite profitably. Broadly speaking, they're operating profitably. There are, of course, pockets. There are individuals. You will always have that. That we seek to overcome that difficulty by allowing the negotiability of quotas up to 5 cans or 50 gallons. And this in turn allows of a person to go out of production if he wishes, only if he wishes. He leaves with some equity, retains his farm and his right to farm, but not to dairy farm. And the person, of course, acquiring that quota is much better equipped to carry on economically. It's working out very well.
And what changes have you seen during your term of office?
Well, I've seen tremendous changes. For example, 17 years ago, the aggregate return to farmers within the milk zone was $14 million a year. Our latest figures, $47 million a year. The aggregate lift in incomes amounts to 250% in 15 years. There's greater production per cow, per man, per acre, and there has been produced efficient and most up-to-date methods. For example, the end result of the product we're handling amounts to $80 million a year. Of that amount, the farmer receives $47 million, as against the $14 million he received years ago, or 17 years ago. The other very important part, and of course perhaps the most important part, is improved service to the community. We deliver 2 million bottles of milk a day, and this is regarded as the most efficient milk delivery service in the world. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because you may know that in America, Europe, the household deliveries have been eliminated. possible. We are trying to improve, not eliminate. And the proof of that is borne out in the local factory's recent endeavour, introducing pure pack container. This is another contribution to providing the community with improved service. Lots and lots and lots can be said under this heading, but I know time's against us.
And finally, Mr. Ferguson, what do you intend doing after May the 31st?
Well, look for a job.
Mr. Bean, why is it that the more crude oil we find in Australia, the higher gasoline prices seem to go?
Well, in fact, they haven't increased yet, and I think this is more a threat than a fact at this moment. And I think perhaps I ought to add that there's really no reason why petrol prices should go up at all as a result of indigenous crude being found in growing quantities, if only that indigenous crude can be priced and used in the right way.
There's a fairly heavy subsidy paid for the exploration of oil in Australia. This must surely add to the final price of the product.
This is because there is a very big incentive built into the price of crude, and also it's a higher value is attributed to it than would apply to imported crudes. The effect of this is to potentially build up the cost of the raw material which the oil industry uses, in fact crude oil. But as I said before, this is partly an artificial situation.
Well, BP, I gather, has been a little unlucky with its exploration in Australia. You've been at it for, 50 years or so and found, well, comparatively little.
Yes, this is unfortunately very true.
This means that from your other resources in the Middle East, you can in fact buy oil, or bring oil, much cheaper than you can buy it in Australia. Why don't you do it?
This is true, and indeed in the past this is precisely what we've done, and precisely what the entire refining industry in Australia has done. And it's only because of the high price that has been attributed to indigenous crude that this situation will change.
Oh, you have two refineries in Australia now, one in the west, Kwinana, and one at Western Port, presumably because of reasonably deep water. Have you considered a third?
Yes, we've always got such possibilities in mind, though the economic facts of life involved are always that it's much cheaper to expand an existing refinery and put in additional plant of one kind or another than it is to start again from scratch and build what is known in the industry as a grassroots refinery.
Well, there's been talk for years of a refinery in the Newcastle area. We haven't got one. Now that there's also talk of development of Port Stephens as a deep water port, has BP considered this as a refinery site?
We certainly did consider Newcastle as an alternative to Western Port near Melbourne when we decided eventually to go to Melbourne. And one of the most important factors that decided the Melbourne site was indeed the fact that there was deep water there already. Newcastle might have been chosen had the circumstances been different at the time, but as I said before, I think it's unlikely that we will go for a third refinery before we've substantially expanded our existing facilities.
Well, taking for granted the fact that you have the facilities you need now, or accept cheap Australian crude, what do you suggest be done about it?
Would you repeat that question, please?
You have two refineries, you have all the crude you need from overseas, but you are in a position where you're forced to use Australian crude as well, and you can't get it at the right price to keep the price of products down here in Australia. What should the oil companies or the government or anybody else do about it to make Australian crude competitive?
I think the most important thing is that means should be found to permit indigenous crude to find its place into the market at a price comparable with imported crudes, having regard to its location and having regard to its quality, because in this way the industry in this country can continue to operate on a direct commercial basis and in the atmosphere of competition which it has always lived in the past.
Ways can be found. Have you any specific suggestions? Cutting subsidies or increasing subsidies elsewhere? Or?
Well, in my opinion, subsidies could be very substantially cut where large-scale production is involved. Indeed, I don't believe that they're necessary in anything like the level that exists in those circumstances. And to the extent that for policy or other reasons smaller scale production has to be maintained, or it's desirable to maintain it, I believe that these can be helped and subsidized in a much more direct way without burdening the price of petroleum products throughout the country.
Two final questions. Of what quality is the crude we're finding in Australia?
The crudes are what are known as light crudes. That means that they have a relatively low specific gravity. This means, too, that they have a fairly high gasoline content and a rather low fuel oil content.
That means we don't get much diesel or paving oils or heavy lubricating oils out.
Quite a lot of diesel will come out of it, but very little heavy fuel oil. And as you say, the feedstock for making bitumen or lubes is unlikely to be available.
And the final question, as far as BP is concerned, not having Australian supplies of its own, is it in a position to buy from other producers?
BP, the way the arrangements work out, is already forced to buy a proportion of indigenous oil from other producers, and looks like being forced to buy very much larger quantities into the future. I think perhaps that answers your question.
If this must happen, what happens to the price of gasoline?
The price of gasoline will go up if the price of the raw material is maintained at an unnecessarily high level.
To most of us, a piece of metal is a piece of metal. We probably recognise the difference between steel, copper and aluminium, but there it pretty well ends. But 300 specialists in metal have been gathering all week here at Newcastle University at the annual conference of the Australian Institute of Metals. For them, metal's a very serious and lifetime study. Now, what does such a brains trust mean to the general consumers, who are, after all, the people who, in the long run, buy metal in its hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of uses? Dr. Bob Baker is the research chief at the Welding Institute in Britain, which used to be called the British Welding Research Association. He's out here to tell us something about welding, or perhaps not. Did you, in fact, come here to tell us how to weld better?
Well, I think at a conference like this, you are dealing with an exchange of information between people who produce materials and people who have to fabricate them into large structures and to design them into large structures, and not only large structures but also very small ones, these saucepans in your kitchen and so on, also produced by welding. And in exchanging information, you want to know what the desirable properties of the materials are, which makes them safer and cheaper to weld, and this has two effects.
Well, does this in fact mean that thanks to the exchange of information which has taken place this week, welders at, for argument's sake, our state dockyard are likely to find themselves in the near future using better equipment or better techniques or perhaps better metal for welding?
Yes, I think a slow development takes place in that direction, and the steelmakers become more aware of what the desirable properties of materials are, which makes them suitable for welding more cheaply and more safely. In this way, you sell more steel, and therefore Newcastle benefits. Also, the structures produced by welding are produced more economically, and this leads to cheaper prices in the shops, or at the very least to an arrest in the rate of rise of prices. Just one small correction, I'm not chief of the Welding Institute, I'm head of the Metallurgical Research Department there.
One of the experts here for this conference is Dr. J.s. Blair, who's the Assistant Director of Research at Stewart's and Lloyd's huge parent plant at Corby in England. Doctor, you're a pipelining specialist. Have you been able to tell us in Australia how to build better and bigger pipelines faster and cheaper?
I should hate to think that I could tell the Australians anything very much. They know a great deal about this already. But I have tried to raise one or two points and exercise the sort of techniques, tell them sort of things that we use in England, which may be some help. And it seems to me that they will have to make sure of the safety aspect of pipelines, particularly gas pipelines. And as yet, we don't know a great deal about this. We know a certain amount. We hope to know a bit more. This is
what's the problem? Is it the metal or is it the technique?
A little bit of both, but it's mostly the material, I would say, and the technique of making the pipes as well.
We can make the necessary metal here in Australia, can we?
Oh, yes. We have to know exactly what it is we want. And this is getting known, not only in Australia, but elsewhere. But, of course, the main object of this conference is not really to give instructions about how things to be done, but to know a bit more, to get a little bit more knowledge. The whole trouble is we don't know enough about things anyway.
And you feel you'll go away knowing more than you did when you came?
I certainly will, and I hope some others will. But to me, it's been the most useful conference, not only but the contacts that we made, not only the technical discussions we've had, but the contacts which we make, the people we can discuss things with later, the more or less permanent friendships, indeed, that we make at a conference of this sort.
One of the Australian representatives here is Mr. Jack Thompson. Mr. Thompson's Chief of Quality Control for BHP, and although he's now stationed in Melbourne, he's conversant with pretty well all Australia's steel-making plants. Mr. Thompson, as a result of a conference like this, will BHP turn out newer, different types of steel in the future, and perhaps a cheaper steel?
Well, we have a continuing and very big research program, and to have the views of leaders of the metallurgical profession from overseas is a very valuable thing in itself. We get their way of thoughts, their own state of development overseas, and we can get many ideas for future development. Yes, the answer to your question, I'd say very definitely yes.
Well, it's been already said that Australia can produce the steel. Are there any big handicaps? What about trained staff?
Well, this is probably one of our great problems in Australia. We are a big country, distances are far apart. This conference is an excellent opportunity for people to get together, for young students to meet leaders in their profession. Have the opportunity of talking to these people is something that encourages them. We are handicapped badly by the present shortage of metallurgists in this country. Tremendous mineral development, development in metals generally of any type. All calling for metallurgists, and we need metallurgists very badly if we are to progress as an industrial nation.
And a conference like this makes Australian metallurgists better.
Yes, it certainly gives an exchange of views, the opportunity to compare views of our customers and users of steel, for example, in my case, is invaluable, and we wouldn't miss these conferences. We look forward to their continuing development in the future.
Thank you very much. That's only 3 of the delegates here who have proven that a conference of, well, metal eggheads like this has something to offer to the Australian public in the way of better and cheaper metals. And that's only 3 out of 300 odd. Murray Masterton reporting for Focus from the Metal Institute's conference at Newcastle University.
This is an artist impression of the Liddell Power Station Project, excluding the river pumping system. The project has a 2,000 megawatt output with 4 500 megawatt 10-volt 90 units. You see here the main power station, the coal handling plant, the main cooling water dam, the rail line diversion of the main Northern Line, the New England Highway diversion. The water from the cooling water system, pumping system, comes in at this point, and it is held behind this main cooling water dam wall. The cooling water dam is an earth and rock filled structure, and it has a 4,200 foot long crest, 140 foot high at the centre, and the quantity of fill is about 4.5 million cubic yards. Here we have the turbine house, housing the 4 500 megawatt turbo alternators, and here we have the 2 reinforced concrete chimney stacks for the exhaust gases from the 4 boilers. Looking down below to an actual construction photo, which I might add is in the opposite hand, we have the turbine house, which is shown here half completed approximately. The total length of the turbine house will be eventually 1,000 feet. We'll come to somewhere down here. The height at this point is 90 feet and the width is 122 feet. And immediately behind the boiler will be the concrete stacks, one there and eventually one here. The stacks are 550 feet high. They're outside diameter at the base of 70 feet and the outside diameter at the top of 30 feet. Again, this is an artist's impression of the coal handling plant. The coal handling plant shown here is the receiving area for the coal coming from the mines. The capacity of storage is over 1 million tonne. The coal is stacked out by stackers automatically and is reclaimed for use in the power station as required by bucket reclaimers. The whole of the operation of this coal storage area is by remote control from the power station area, coal being brought by the reclaimer along the various conveyor belts that you see here, through the conveyor belts up into the building for use in the boiler. This is the 330 kV outdoor switch yard where all the power which is generated from the units is sent out into the state interconnected system.
Briefly, Mr. Jones, when will Liddell be producing its first power?
Well, number 2 unit, which is the first unit, is scheduled to be on firm commercial load in the winter of 1971.
And how does the Liddell project compare in size to the Vales Point and Munmora power stations in the Newcastle area?
Well, Vales Point power station is 875 megawatts, Munmora is 1400 megawatts, and Liddell, as I previously said, is 2000 megawatts.
And finally, Mr. Jones, how is progress to date?
The progress to date has been very satisfactory. The work in hand has been going quite well. If it continues to go as it is, and we expect it will, we anticipate that we'll meet the scheduled commissioning dates for the first unit and all subsequent units.
Look at the baby. Now listen. Tell Mummy it's a baby. Tell Mummy it's a baby. It's a nice baby. Where's your baby, Alison? Where's your baby? Is this your baby?
That's a microphone. This is one of the problems.
Isn't that sound on?
Alison's 2, and it's at this age that the education for the deaf's really got to begin. But the most difficult part, of course, is deciding, is a baby deaf? Mr. Lumbey, how did you find out that your daughter was deaf?
Well, we noticed that Alison was mouthing words, but not reproducing speech. And also she wasn't responding to sound as well as our first child, Kathy.
And what did you do about it?
Well, we asked our paediatrician to examine her hearing, and he referred us to the Commonwealth Acoustic Laboratory in Newcastle. And from there they assessed that Alison has a hearing loss which will require special education.
And how long has she had the hearing aid?
Since she was 16 months, which is 8 months.
And how long before she was able to say anything?
I think it took about 2 months before she was able to respond to a sound. And one of her first words was, as you heard then, baby, which she says quite well.
And where does Alison go from here?
Well, Alison was being educated at the Child Health Centre through Newcastle East Public School.
And Alison, have you got anything to say for us? When Alison comes down to the Child Health Centre for further treatment and education, this is the sort of scene she'll find. This boy at 4 is quite old enough to make use of the specialised speech training unit.
What's your name? Mitchell. How old are you, Mitchell? 4. Oh, let's have a look at our book. What's this? Hawk. What's this? Cat. No, a rooster. Rooster. Cow. What's this? Baby. What's this? Pig. Let's count them, Mitchell. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Lovely. What's this?
Come in, Miss Frost.
Yes.
How's young Mitchell doing?
Mitchell's doing extremely well. He's been coming to the Child Health Centre now for about a little over 2 years. He's progressed from 2 words when he first came, mum and car, to over 200 words in his expressive vocabulary and up to about 400 in his receptive language.
And what's this machine that you're using?
Now, this is an Amplivox speech training unit. It amplifies sound, and of course it means that the sound goes directly into the child's ear, and he also has this boom microphone so that he's receiving his own voice back.
Well, what's the next step, and where does he go from here?
He'll go into an OD class, that's an opportunity deaf class, in a normal public school.
These children are deaf. You'd hardly know it. But here at Newcastle East School, they have the equipment and the teachers to encourage what residual hearing they have and to bring them along to the stage where they can even sing. Here, for instance, is a young 5-year-old learning to read from the board words which otherwise he would never hear for himself without special assistance. The more senior pupils at Newcastle East here even go in for producing their own plays. Miss Brost is the teacher. Tell me, Miss Brost, what's the object of this?
This is portion of a play, The Queen of Hearts, these children are doing. The main aim is to encourage spontaneous expression and also encourage clear diction.
Jack, did you steal those hats? No, Mother. Don't buy it. Go get the doctor. I don't want the doctor. them jams. Why not? Because it will make the jam spread up like a bit and go bang. Oh! The back of the way. I had a lot of jam. I took the cat. Oh!
There's living proof that taking adequate care of deaf children is a very worthwhile effort. Sitting with me is Mrs. Elizabeth Burgess, born deaf, and who suffered through an early deaf childhood, but now appears to be suffering no handicap at all. Mrs. Burgess, when did your parents find out that you were deaf?
When I was about 3, my parents discovered that I became deaf. My mother had me bear, then measles, into my treatment.
And when did you learn to make sounds for yourself by lip reading? You were about 4?
Yes, that's right. That's when the first break, what they describe as the first breakthrough came. My mother was thrilled, I believe.
You must have been thrilled. Did you suffer at all at school because you were deaf?
No, not at all. I'm pretty lucky, I think. Everyone was always good and kind to me. The only nothing is I'm ever shocked. From one guest, I was always nice to the other people. Anyway, okay.
And there are obviously no handicaps now. You're obviously happily married with a beautiful little girl.
Yes, that's right.
Did you go to a deaf school at all, or what sort of special training did you have?
I did not attend a deaf school. I attended a deaf kindergarten at Piedmont when I was about 3 to 4 years old, but that was part-time at the same time as a kindergarten, normal kindergarten. And when I went to the normal primary school, I did have free training an hour a week. But apart from that, no real special training by professional people. My mother did all the training, in national fact.
Well, there's a lot more help available these days. Do you wear a hearing aid?
Oh, yes. Oh, the wear hearing aid.
You wear a hearing aid all the time now?
Yes.
How do you manage speaking on the telephone and this sort of thing?
So until it gets work. But actually, at the telephone, I get out with converted with people that I am familiar with. And I can anticipate what they like us to talk about. But if they get onto a new subject, I'm just a little bit lost sometimes, but they have to still talk to me.
Well, otherwise you're living a perfectly normal life in spite of the handicap.
That's right, yes.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Mr. Moylan, what type of boy will come to this home?
They'll be delinquent boys who are 16 to 18 years of age who've been committed to an institution by a court. They'll be boys that we on intake will classify and we'll pick out from those coming to us boys who appear to have a aptitude and an attitude for trade work, and we will be directing those here for that type of training.
What will their average stay be?
A bit hard to assess at this point of time, but I would feel probably somewhere about 9 months.
And where would they go from here? So if they didn't settle down here?
If they didn't settle down here, they probably could go on to a closed institution we have at Tamworth. We wouldn't expect many would go onto there. We would be confident that most of them would settle down here and do quite well.
How does the delinquency rate in New South Wales compare to other states in Australia?
There are no really accurate figures on this because there have not been uniform statistics kept. But we feel that New South Wales at least is, the delinquency rate is as low, if not lower, than in other states of the Commonwealth.
Once the boys have been through an institution similar to this, do they return to Crown afterwards?
Again, this again is difficult to say accurately. There are no very accurate research figures kept. We do feel that a significant number of those who pass through our hands never again lapse into crime. Some figures would suggest this might be as high as 70%, but again this may be questionable because the research is not accurate at this stage.
So it appears that you want to keep the youth as active as you can.
He's kept quite active during the whole of his waking day, which would be somewhere from 6:30 to 9 p.m. when lights will be out. By then we think he's had a full day and he's ready for a good night's sleep.
And why did you select this site at Carry for this home?
Well, we looked around New South Wales for a site. We need a site which will offer services such as electricity and gas and opportunity for sewerage. We need a fairly substantial area of ground for the building complex, for recreational grounds and so on. And we need an area where we think we can recruit people for staff. These are people we feel with some trade background or some interest in youth, and we feel that this will be forthcoming in the Curry Newcastle district.
When the people of Lake Macquarie Shire go to the poll later this year, they'll be faced with 3 issues: electing a new council for the next triennial term, members for the 6 urban area committees, and a referendum for or against the abolition of the committees. It will be confusing to say the least. At a meeting at the Bullaroo Community Hall on Thursday night, representatives of the committees met to determine a policy on the abolition proposal. The move to abolish these committees came from Cardiff, and the Shire Council agreed to hold the referendum in conjunction with the elections on December the 7th. There are 6 such committees in Lake Macquarie Shire: Charlestown, Cardiff, Bullaroo, Warners Bay, Belmont and Toronto. All are responsible for the Shire Council, which has its headquarters here in Bullaroo. This meeting was convened by the Bullaroo Committee, but only committee members and the news media attended. The general public, which will have the final say on referendum day, were not invited, nor the councillors who ordered the poll. This is what happened at the meeting.
Milton Stiles from Charlestown, you move that we form a committee here tonight.
Form a committee here right now.
I see. And how many men then do you think should we have in it?
I feel it would be out of order if I were to say in this present motion, I think the first thing we must do is agree to form a committee, and then perhaps would consider a second motion that the chairman of each committee be members of this same committee.
Well, will you move that way then? That we...
I'll move the motion that the committee be formed here tonight.
Is there a second to that? It's seconded here by Mr. Burke. All right, it's been moved and seconded that it be formed a
Well, this is not the motion. The motion is that we form a committee.
We form a committee at this stage, sir.
You must get one motion off first.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we form a committee here tonight. Now,
Campaign committee, yeah, campaign.
well, that's what it will be, really, as a campaign committee. So, all in favour of that forming committee?
Right.
Show of hands then, if you wish. All right. Okay, that motion is carried then.
This local government undertaking in Maitland is going through a worrying period. For the second year running, the city-run abattoir recorded another substantial loss, which sparked off a debate in the Maitland Council committees on Tuesday night, and it has also caused a stir in other circles since then. In the words of the auditor, the Maitland Abattoir experienced another disastrous year in 1967.
Oh, no, certainly I do. I reaffirm them. I think it was merely an amplification on the auditor's report, and I think that I'm quite sure that at the present stage, financially, the abattoir is untenable.
Alderman Blake, do you consider that the Maitland Abattoir has arrived at this situation through there being too many abattoirs in the state?
Partly, yes. There are a number, location-wise, that are prejudicial to the Maitland Abattoir succeeding. We have them, one at Edinburgh at Gunnerborough, we have one at Aberdeen, and of course the one at Newcastle. Whilst the one at Newcastle is a local government instrumentality, training concern, the one at Aberdeen is a public company and a highly efficient one.
Would you consider that Maitland is in the unfortunate geographical position of being sandwiched in between a local government undertaking at Newcastle and a company undertaking at Aberdeen?
Partly to blame, yes. Not overall, though. I feel that these factors would have been taken into account in the first instance when the abattoir was built, when the venture was undertaken. However, that can only be, we can only account part of the blame at this stage of our financial dilemma to its actual location.
Therefore, the abattoir doesn't cost the ratepayer a cent in operation.
Oh no, they're not. The abattoir concern is a separate and distinct undertaking, a trading undertaking. It has no relationship to the general fund to which the ratepayers contribute.
I then interviewed the chairman of the vice chairman of the abattoir committee, Alderman Robinson. Mr. Robinson, do you agree with what Alderman Blake had to say the other night?
I certainly do not.
Why is that?
Well, it's not a remedy to our situation at all, because if we were to close the abattoirs down, we'd lose a lot more money than we're losing at the present time.
How much money would this be?
Well, our loan commitments before we start to show a profit at all is about $2,500. Well, if we close the abattoirs down, that would mean another $1,000 loss, and we would have a loss of over $3,000 weekly in the abattoirs if we close them down.
Has the committee anything in mind of arrest these deficits?
Yes, the committee has done everything possible. With our general manager, we've made inquiries out of every wholesale meat operator in the state, and we've even gone interstate at the present time. And we feel that the industry at the present time is saturated with the amount of cattle that's coming forward for killing. And this position, I don't think, will be remedied until another 12 months has passed.
So in actual fact, the next 12 months could be critical for the Maitland Abattoir.
Well, that's my opinion. I think the next 12 months will be a critical period for us.
And what will happen then if you don't come out of this period?
Well, then we've got to change our method of trading. Today we are merely a service abattoir. We don't do any wholesale business at all. We do that through operators. And it may be possible that we will be compelled to go into the trading operations. Now, this is a pretty costly business. And our advice at the present time, the time is not right for us to do trading.
And I believe that the abattoir here at Maitland was built about 2 or 3 years ahead of its time. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think so. Well, it's pretty difficult to know, to look ahead any length of time. I believe the council at the time, under the advice of experts, mind you, not the aldermen, under the advice of experts, they advised that this abattoir should be built. And of course, under the direction of the Department of Primary Industry, who also steps in, they had to build up to the specification required. Now, I do believe now, looking backwards, we are 2 or 3 years ahead of our time. That's my opinion. But it's a pretty hard question to know just how far ahead we can go.
Mr. Robinson, in your opinion, if the government hadn't established these regional abattoirs at Moree and Guyra, what would the situation be at Maitland at the moment?
Well, the situation in most of the abattoirs, the existing abattoirs, would be improved. We're oversupplied with abattoirs. Every shire, every municipality is looking out to get an abattoir. Well, our unprofitability proves that the overbuilding of abattoirs is one of our problems.
Well, the abattoir is a business undertaking. As such, it has to compete with highly efficient public companies. Once accepting that fact, we have to, in turn, treat it on an efficient basis. That can only be done by decreasing our overhead, which incidentally increased $48,000 last year, as against an increase in income of only $2,000. Now, this has to be rectified. We can only do that by becoming more efficient. This is exceedingly difficult because we're a local government instrumentality. Long service leave, we have holidays and depreciation and maintenance. Either that, well, I'm afraid, and this is the recourse, the only recourse that the financial statement would allow us to do, outside of government assistance, it would be to close the abattoir and negotiate a sale.
Now, there are many ways that this problem could be overcome. First of all, the Department of Decentralisation should have some very big influence in maintaining a works of this nature in the country. It's all very well to spend 120 millions on the Opera House and another 90 millions on the Eastern Suburbs Railway. The fact remains that the country here is underdeveloped, and we're not receiving sufficient assistance from government sources to maintain the employment ratio. Now, that's that part of it.
But in regard to our own part of it, first of all, we'll have to be relieved even from our own council. We pay rates like any other organisation or business. We pay full rates, we pay all water rates, we pay our sustenance fees to the city council. All of this is a drain on our profits. And it must be remembered that we get no assistance at all from the general fund. We've got to stand in council on our own feet. And anything we do here, we're responsible for. Now, the government have promised assistance, but like all these things, there's a committee sitting to investigate the condition of all country habitors at the present time, but until such times as that committee makes its decision, places it before the minister, we can get no reply. Now, that's the situation as I see it briefly.
Okay, start off with, we'll do a big thing on the introduction to the Army. How many of you people have had various sort of jobs before you came in? Motor mechanics. Anyone in here? Anything else? Cane cutters. Drivers. Truckies. Should have a few jobs. Clerical workers, bank clerks. All these sort of things. All right, in the Army, everything except a cane cutter. We've got the same sort of job, same sort of things for you to do. After your 10 weeks here, most of you will be getting into these sort of jobs. Telling a story not so long ago about a kid, came in, didn't have anything, went out of the Army as an A-grade motor mechanic. So you got something to look forward to. We don't promise it to you all, it can happen. This is the sort of thing that the Army can offer you, not the everyday run-of-the-mill job where you go to work at 9 in the morning maybe, knock off at 5 at night, have an hour for lunch. You all know that we start work 6 o'clock in the morning, work for 24 hours a day. Good change for you all. Enjoying your stay here so far? Hold up! Up! 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Hold up! Up! 1, 2, 3, 1. 5 minutes, Marco! Fire! Out! 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
We're at Legacy House in Gosford tonight, where there's a public meeting, and the way public meetings go, this one's pretty well attended. Most of the people here tonight are pretty much against the government, mainly because of the undenied reports that work on the expressway between Sydney and Newcastle will stop at the end of the southern section, which is now in progress. Represented tonight is a wide section of the community. There are the unions, there is the member for Wyong, Mr. Jensen, representatives of the contractors, of the business community and the general public. The meeting was called as a result of a stop work meeting at Cowan in the middle of last month, which decided that some concerted action had to be taken to try and counter the government's decision to stop work on the expressway.
For those that haven't heard union officials speaking regarding this important crisis, there are something to the order of 650 people presently engaged on the project. And amongst those 650 people, it's been estimated, a very conservative estimate, that they would represent in a direct fashion something to the order of 2,250 people, by virtue of their wives, their sons and daughters, and relations who are dependent upon the earnings of these people. Now, the wage bill from the project is estimated to be in the vicinity of $93,000 to $100,000 per fortnight. So you can appreciate quite readily that we are talking in terms of real money. Some little time ago, this question was raised by our Labor parliamentary colleagues in the House, asking as to whether it was the intention of the government to proceed on the next phase of the operation. And it was said that this matter was of some concern for the Minister, and the Department of Main Roads would have some of the answers to this. But of course, in the statement issued by the spokesman for the Department of Main Roads, it was made quite clear and abundant to all concerned that the Department do not have any plans now or in the immediate future to continue on with this important project. And so they're in a dilemma.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for the opportunity to address you tonight. Mr. Wheeler has asked me quite a few questions about it, and I'm actually very vitally interested in the expressway for many reasons. One, that I'm interested in the welfare of our staff, and although we will not be dismissing anybody, they will not earn the money they are earning at the present time. As a round figure, I would say that we will be spending $6,000 a week less in Gosford, and you get 10 other such organisations, which is quite a lot of money. But to me it seems quite a shame to think that this work's got to stop, because I've been fortunate. I've had 2 trips through the United States and travelled approximately 3,000 miles on expressways. And I say this in all sincerity, I never seen any terrain in the States as rough as this section that they're working on at the moment. And I think that each and every one that's employed there, from the engineers right down to the billy boy, have done a really wonderful job. Well, to disband a gang such as this, it will take a long time to pick up the threads. If, say, in 12 months' time they say we're going to start again.
Unfortunately, you are afflicted with a government that does not believe in the construction of this expressway. When the proposal was instituted in 1962, and I'll produce evidence of the cabinet minute that got this thing going and the circumstances that preceded it, and the measure of continuity built into the cabinet decision. When this was done, Mr. Askin said, "You're building a road to nowhere." That's what Mr. Askin called the Sydney-Newcastle Expressway. And in January 1962, the then Labor government, on the submission of the man who's now leader of the opposition, Mr. Hills, considered 3 separate propositions for the construction of a tollway from Sydney to Newcastle by private enterprise who would levy tolls. You remember these proposals were considered. On the 19th of January, they were rejected by the Cabinet, and instead, the recommendation that was approved by Cabinet began like this. It is considered that arrangements should be made to enable the Department of Main Roads itself to undertake the project, including the collection of the tolls. It goes on further and says, the part of the Sydney-Newcastle Road in most urgent need of traffic relief is the length between the Hornsby area and the Gosford-Wyong area. It goes on again and says after the Calgary-Rimba section, the section from Hawkesbury River to Calgary is next in order of urgency, and then the section from Hornsby to the Hawkesbury River. Listen to this. 1962, loan funds would need to be used to pay for the work in the initial stages, as tolls could not be imposed until there is a reasonable length of new road available to the public. Having regard to the total estimated cost of £16 million, $32 million, it is desirable that £1 million of loan funds be made available each year for 10 years, so as to provide, together with the proceeds of the toll charges, sufficient money to ensure completion of the project within that time. So here you have a determination by government for a 10-year project relating to the construction of the expressway. All this implies Treasury approval to the allocation of the funds necessary for a 10-year concept, to be supplemented by the toll receipts so that there could be continuous activity in the construction of this expressway. But here we have a government that's going to build the Sydney Hospital at Parramatta. They're now going to build the Sydney-Newcastle Expressway on the Great Western Highway. And there's no question that this is one of the reasons for the cessation.
I'll read the resolution out. It's this, friends. We, the citizens of the Central Coast District, call upon the Government of New South Wales, through the Premier, to meet a delegation of people representing various community interests. We sincerely believe it is the intentions of the Government to abandon further work on the expressway, following the completion of the current section of work. Such action will be against the public interest of the community at large. We call upon the Government to initiate plans for the continuity of the project as a matter of urgency, and further that employees on the project be requested to join a deputation by engaging in a car cavalcade from the project to Parliament House to coincide with the deputation meeting the Government. All those in favour of the resolution say aye. Aye. Any opposition? I'll declare it carried unanimously.
Well, that was the feeling of the public meeting in Gosford tonight. Generally speaking, they're pretty hot with the government about its lack of intentions for the future of the roadway. This proposal for a motorcade to Sydney in support of the delegation which is going to try and see the government, of course, also implies a stoppage of work on the project while it is on. Whether this will bring any increased pressure and enough pressure on the government to make it change its mind, we must wait and see. This is Bill Morgan for Focus.
The jackhammers are pounding away outside as this $13 million unit, the first unit of Victoria's Arts Centre. Inside, there's already an air of opulence. The paintings are being moved in for the National Gallery. And here in his office, in a building which has been completed on time, on budget, and without any fuss or lotteries, is the director, the man responsible, Mr. Eric Westbrook. Tell me, Mr. Westbrook, why has Victoria been able to do so much more than any other state in the Commonwealth in the arts field?
Well, I think one of the prime reasons is that the Victorian government has devoted more attention and certainly more money to the arts in the country. There's been an overall plan. First of all, the building of the Arts Centre here, of which this, as you've said, is the first unit. It's to be followed, of course, with a symphony hall and 3 theatres with all their associated activities. And then, at the same time, from this mother centre, as it were, in Melbourne, we have radiating what we call the regional plan.
Now, was this your idea, this regional plan?
Yes, as the senior public servant, I put this up some years ago to the government, and what happened was that the existing galleries, there were a number of existing galleries, formed themselves into a public galleries group, and then we got the government to fill in that plan where there were gaps, you see. Cities like Hamilton, where nothing occurred. Places like Mildura, Sale, Shepparton, now have completely new galleries, and in some cases, complete art centres.
Well, is this a sort of spontaneous growth of interest, or has it been promoted by, well, yourself and perhaps the government, almost as one promotes a pop song?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that in Australia at the moment, we've come over the brow of the hill. We've got to the point when we now have the material things. We have the cars, the washing machines, the kids at good schools, and so on. And people are really now seeking something more.
Now, this is Victoria you're talking about, or Australia?
I think all over Australia, but in Victoria we've provided the means for this interest to express itself and to find its focus.
Do you find then that competitions or, art shows, art competitions for which people have given prizes are an assistance to the gallery?
I think in many ways they are, but of course my view is that unless the prize now is a generous one, they're not much good. You see, the fact is that the Australian art market is now booming, and the big artists, the important artists, and after all, you shouldn't be interested in any but the best, should you? That the best artists will not come in for small prizes far below what they can fetch in the ordinary market. That's quite clear. I mean, that's a normal thing.
Mr. Westbrook, in the Hunter we've got an increasing number of much smaller art shows like Musselbrook and one or two other centres. Are these, by their very lack of size and lack of prize money, doing art a disservice rather than encouraging it?
Well, of course, I can't speak for areas that must have their own special circumstances. But if I were director, or if I was the chairman of a committee running one of these galleries, I would think that if we couldn't rake together a big enough prize to make get an interest among the better artists, it would be far better to spend that money on a purchase, a direct purchase of something we wanted. I think that's the way that a good collection can be built up.
What about our own competition in Newcastle? Newcastle Gallery is not a large one by Victorian standards.
No, but it's a very lively one, which I think is just as important, really. I've always admired what's gone on in Newcastle. I think your two directors, Mr. Docking and your present director, Mr. Thomas, have shown a real appreciation of the needs of your community. And this is, after all, what a gallery must do. Now, your prize is, I think, sufficiently good, and I wouldn't have been associated with it, in fact, unless I thought that, because I'm a professional. And as a professional, I only naturally give my backing to something that's worthwhile. I think your prize is good enough to attract good painters, and isn't that what we're after?
We have in New South Wales also professionals in our gallery and in Sydney. How is it then that they are not able to achieve in the art world what you have done in Victoria?
Well, again, you know, it's difficult to comment on the situation in another area because the social, political situation is very different. But I would think, if I might say this as a Victorian, that your government in New South Wales has not really come to the party in the way that my own government has. After all, it has not yet laid down any large sums of money to help its own develop. I believe I'm right in saying that.
What about art in general? Do you not feel that in Australia, with the current interest boom in art, I suppose, that the graphic arts are being sponsored by governments and individuals at the expense of the other art forms?
Well, I think that at any one time, I've always believed this, that at any one time, one art is probably predominant. And after all, we've had a long tradition of painting in this country, right from the early days of first settlement. But there's every sign that the other arts, the performing arts, are beginning to rise up. For instance, the setting up of the federal government's Arts Council, which is almost certainly going to devote most of its time and money to the performing arts. The appearance of young composers, musical composers, the wonderful work being done certainly here by the Melbourne Theatre Company, which, as you know, is partly supported by the Melbourne City Council. That's a different type of subsidy. And the theatres in Sydney, which are going, I think, remarkably well. So I think you can say that in the next few years, the performing arts will almost certainly get the same interest and the same support as the visual arts are now.
Well, you can talk of support for the visual arts in Victoria. One final question. In New South Wales, we have a government, we have professional directors, but we haven't the same interest in art that we have here. What do we do to get it?
Well, you know, this is a long, difficult answer to give, really, because it does depend on personalities, the personality of ministers, the personality of administrators and executive people. But I would think that it should be pointed out to your government that in a city the size and the quality of Sydney, for instance, to have a building such as at the moment is provided for the public is really rather a disgrace. And that it might well be a good idea to devote some of the flow, which at the moment is going into the Opera House, into the art gallery.
Mrs. Hill, how did you first become interested in this erosion program?
Oh, well, I've been coming down here all my life. I've surfed on the beach, and I know every inch of the country, and I've always been very interested in it. And I was very alarmed to see the sand dunes, the natural protection to the land.
How long would you have lived in the area?
I've been living here now for about 6 years, but I've been coming down here since I was a small child of 4.
And has it really changed that much since the earlier days?
It has changed recently. It's unbelievable. You wouldn't recognize what the country was because sand dunes have actually been removed.
Now, I believe you've, off your own bat, contacted a soil conservation expert in Kempsey, is that right?
Yes, soil conservation in Kempsey. I wrote to Mr. Bridges and I told him the terrific erosion and sand drift problems and dunes being removed by council, and he sent Mr. Barr down. He's the inspector that does the whole of the coast, and he was very alarmed and disturbed when he saw what was happening, and he sent in a full report to council and offered the services of the soil conservation in New South Wales.
And have you approached the council yourself about the erosion?
I have approached the council. I have been trying to write letters, constructive letters, and no personalities or anything. And I've tried as well as that to get the statements from professionals bearing out what I can see is happening.
And the whole time you've been involved in this program, have you seen the council do anything constructive to stop the erosion?
No, I haven't. So the last meeting at the Womberall Civic Improvement, a motion was moved that council refer to the soil conservation's report, which was sent in January. I took Mr. Barr, the inspector, around in November, and I asked them to accept their report and to restore the dunes and the beach and the erosion under their supervision.
Right. Professor, you've had a look round now. Just how bad is the erosion here?
Well, I would say it's pretty bad, and it's going to get far worse unless you are prepared to do something immediately about it.
And what would be the main cause of the erosion?
Well, I would say simply people using the beach intensively.
Is there any way we can stop this? I mean, it's a bit hard to tell someone not to use the beach.
Well, the principle we're working on in Queensland is that we simply have to conserve the sand at all costs.
I believe in Queensland you're spending, was it $5-6 million trying to rebuild the beaches?
Well, this is only fortunately in one circumstances where we had a disaster happen. And this is what we're trying to avoid anywhere else, because obviously we can't afford this sort of thing.
Can you draw a parallel between the Gold Coast disaster and what's happening here at Terrigal?
Well, I would say that this, although it'll probably happen a little slower because of the circumstances, that you're heading for it right now.
Professor, this business of building retaining walls, is that as dangerous as they say?
Well, a retaining wall only, even if well built, will protect the land. Unfortunately, so far as we know, most forms of wall cause the beach to go. The beach as an Australian knows the beach.
And the subdivisions being built right down onto the beach, is this going to cause a problem in years to come?
Well, we think so, because we look upon the dunes as a reservoir of sand that the sea can have to play with in times of violent storm. This belongs to the sea. It's part of the beach.
And if things continue the way they are, can you estimate how long it will be before Terrigal Beach completely disappears?
Well, quite honestly, no. Without a very intimate detail of what the state of the beach is just at the present time. I mean, you get a much bigger variation from day to day and week to week than you do from year to year. But it has all the signs of being very, very sick.
Well, in your own state of Queensland, there's talk of importing sand to the Gold Coast. Do you think this will be necessary here?
I think this will have to come.
We'll have to bring sand in to put back what's been lost by erosion.
Yes.
And where will this sand come from?
Well, this is a case of where can you get it from the cheapest.
Oh, very good so far. I've been planning on Monday and had a look around, and it seems to be a bit scattered, you know, the activities around the place.
Well, it's the first time I've been here.
Where are you from?
From Hamilton North. Oh, no show. Oh, I like the show.
You've been to previous Mattaras?
Yes, all of them.
And what do you think of them?
Well, I think they're a credit to Newcastle. Every year they seem to get better.
Excuse me, what do you think of Mattara this year?
Well, it's very good. It's much better than it has been, I think.
Why is that?
Well, there's more to it than there usually is. The art is much better, and the handicrafts exhibition, which I've seen.
Yes, it's not too bad.
Why is it not too bad?
Oh, well, it's something for the children, really. I mean, I'm not interested myself, but the kiddies think it's great.
Oh, it's great, buddy.
What about you? Would you like to see Mattara staged every day of the year?
Yeah.
And now for his verdict on the 1968 Mattara, the chairman of the organising committee, Alderman Bell.
First of all, Jeff, I think we must agree that the weather has been very favourable regarding Mattara. This in no small way contributed to its success. But we do realise as a committee, although in my personal opinion we were better organised than we have ever been before, I have seen many gaps in the organising of Mattara which have to be filled, and naturally we are looking forward to next year to be able to fill these gaps and improve on our performances this year. But we are very happy with the way that things ran so smoothly this year. I think that this has been the best of Mattaras, but this is no reason why we shouldn't improve on it.
One of the main attractions in Civic Park is, of course, Sideshow Alley. You're representing the showmen here today. How have the showmen fared this Mattara?
Well, I think they've come out of it all right. They found it fairly good. Considering last year they had a fairly wet season, but everything seems to be going along pretty good. There seems to be a fairly good crowd here each night, mainly adults and plenty of kiddies in the afternoon.
So more or less it's well worthwhile coming to Newcastle Mattara, really?
Oh, I'd say definitely. It's a success as far as we're concerned. I really think that this is the right time of the year to hold it. And everybody seems to be enjoying themselves here. Everybody's catered for. As you can see, they start rolling in here about 9:30 to 10 in the morning, and it just goes on continuously. And last night we never closed till about 11:30.
Have you got any suggestions of improving Mattara?
Well, one really that sticks in my mind is the weather. It's too cold this time of year, I think.
What time of the year would you like to see it?
Well, probably next month, maybe. October, it's a lot warmer then.
To settle the argument of the weather once and for all, an explanation from our weather expert, Des Hart.
As you know, the days that we've been having during the last week have certainly been pleasant enough, but we've struck one a little out of the box. Normally we should have westerly winds at this time and fairly cool night temperatures. And this perhaps may explain why we don't get the attendances that the Civic Fathers look for.
The past 10 days has been something of a fairy tale dream for our Mattara Princess, Miss Sandra Wiggins. Miss Wiggins, if you were given the same opportunity, would you do the same thing over again?
Yes, I think I would. It's been such an experience for the number of kind and friendly people that I've met, and you get to see things that perhaps you wouldn't go to see if you were just the ordinary citizen. The only part that I feel that I could go without doing again, and that would be the judging on Friday night.
Alderman Bell, there's been some controversy over the opening night. Is the committee anything in mind to improving these nights in future years?
Yes, I don't think anyone's more conscious than the committee of the fact that we did fall down a bit on the early opening ceremony, and I can assure you that discussions took place on this aspect of it immediately after the opening on Friday night at the official reception. Members of the committee were discussing this, and we feel that we can eliminate the causes this year.
Sport has again been one of this year's Mattara highlights, with bowls, basketball, hockey, athletics, croquet and tennis. All these events have been staged specially for the Mattara, but there's also been football semi-finals and finals on the 2 Saturdays of the festival. Without Mattara, would these events have been staged in the first place?
With regard to the sporting functions arranged around Mattara, there are a number that have been instituted because of Mattara and have continued and do make a great contribution to Mattara. Particularly the Bowls Carnival, the Hockey Carnival and the Amateur Athletic Carnival, these were instituted earlier because of Mattara and have contributed over the years to the success of Mattara.
One of the facets of Mattara is to attract a tourist. But has the Mattara attracted a tourist? The answer is supplied by the officer in charge of the Hunter Valley Tourist Authority, Mr. Fred Barker.
To a certain extent, I think it has. Over the last week, we've had at the Information Centre here at Hexham between 30 to 40 specific inquiries on Mattara. Now, these are from people who have been travelling through. Some we found have returned from holidays in the Gold Coast and parts of northern New South Wales, returning to Newcastle, coming into the centre, asking about Mattara, and then spending the night in Newcastle.
What improvements can be made to make Mattara a little bit better in future years? One suggestion from a former chairman of the Mattara Committee, Mr. Dave Appleby.
Yes, Jeff, I've got a few suggestions. The word Mattara means the hand of friendship. Now, Newcastle is very warm in friendship, and I feel that this friendship should be extended to a sister city. I think that if we took, let's say, New Zealand and some particular town in New Zealand, then we could extend this hand of friendship. We could make interrelationships between the two cities such that were tourist exchange, things of this nature. We could have Mattara opened by, say, the High Commissioner or the Mayor of that particular city. We could bring their culture, their high points, and bring them all out here. Maybe if it was New Zealand, we could have a league team playing. I think that this would be a definite improvement. We have the theme, we have everything right. We cannot make Mattara in 5 minutes. It takes many years of hard work to make Mattara. I feel that we've reached a stage in Mattara's development where we can branch out, go overseas, get some city, make a big thing of it, and this would be fulfilling the theme of the hand of friendship.
Have you got any other suggestions to improve Mattara?
Well, I think the procession should be held at night.
Why is that?
Well, I think it adds to the carnival atmosphere, and it would just be much more fun all around, I think, except for the little kids, of course.
Alderman Bell, there was one criticism that Mattara should comprise of the opening night and the procession, and these two should be brought closer together. What have you got to say to that?
Well, I would be the first to agree, Jeff, that these are our two main features, the opening night and the Mattara procession, but you just don't put all your eggs in one basket when you're running a festival.
And finally, Alderman Bell, what have you got in mind to improving next year's Mattara?
Well, a complete review of all the attractions we had this year. We were disappointed with the response to functions we arranged in the City Hall and the Civic Winter Garden. These we hope to build up next year and possibly by greater publicity make people aware of what is going on. But generally speaking, Jeff, it will be a review of the functions we held this year, together trying to improve on them, and a build-up and a widening and a broadening of the scope of Mattara.
Thank you, Alderman Bell. Well, Mattara is over for another year, and so is Focus. Jeff Greaves reporting from Civic Park.